Hello, I'm Bob Von Bargen, President Emeritus of the Armed Forces Heritage Museum, and your host for this serialization of Veterans Interviews. The story we have today is one of courage and persistence in the face of insurmountable odds. It is the World War II experiences of Howard Brooks. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor and the war in the Pacific started, Howard was an electrician's mate aboard the cruiser USS Houston. It was docked in the Philippine Islands port. When the ship was ordered to assist and evacuate American personnel, Howard got involved in an adventure that would change the course of his life. Join me now as we watch Howard Brooks tell about his experiences in February 1942 as the cruiser Houston attempts to escape the region of the Philippines and sail and join up with Allied naval forces in the Indian Ocean.
I was advised I was to be transferred to the USS Houston and the Asiatic Fleet.
Where were you when the war began?
Iloilo. And we went into that harbor. We had to wait for a couple officers who were up in Shanghai. And we took these guys aboard, and we got underway. And it was just after dark, not long after dark. Word was announced, all hands, now hear this. We are now in a state of war. Pearl Harbor has been bombed by the Japanese.
When you got underway, you headed south?
We were headed for the port of Surabaya and on the island of Java. I remember as we approached Borneo, you go through, it's called Malacca Straits. We were instructed to go down to Darwin, Australia. And our duty was to convoy ships back up to Java.
Okay. When did you encounter the Japanese initially?
Our first contact with Japanese was February the 4th. I remember at about 9 o'clock in the morning, we counted at least 45 planes. Some of us, we liked to go out on the deck and watch. All we had to do was go up one ladder, and we watched the aircraft, anti-aircraft guns.
These were dive bombers?
No, they were two-engine Bettys. They were two-engine Bettys. Our damage control officer called. He said, "I need 2 electricians. The number 8 gun ammunition hoist, they're having trouble." So me and another electrician, he says, go check on this. And while we were checking on that hoist, we heard a bomb hit us. We could feel the concussion and the noise it made. We found out later that whole damage control party was wiped out, except me and this other guy. And if we hadn't been up to this repair, we would have been with them. That was the 4th of February, and that was our first action. We were bombed 2 or 3 times after that, but we were never hit. 27th, in the morning, we met the Japanese Navy at sea. It's just north, just out of Surabaya, north into the Java Sea. It lasted, way late in the afternoon. And during that time, one of the British ships, the Exeter, was badly damaged. Dutch ships, they were sunk. My ship and the Perth were the only 2 ships that were still in the formation at all. So we cruised to the western end of Java. We went into the harbor and tied up. Well, a little after dark, we got underway. We were going to make an effort to go through the Sunda Straits between Java and Sumatra into the Indian Ocean and try to get to Australia. And the Perth was firing at some vessel. They were firing at a Japanese destroyer, which they had met. And the next thing we knew, we were in the middle of a landing force. All I saw that night was Japanese destroyers. I think for a whole solid hour we were firing at everything we had on the ship. The only thing we had left was star shells. And we were firing point-blank star shells at Japanese destroyers. Their planes, their SLCs that looked just like ours, were flying over us just like it was daylight. We lasted for most an hour. But the Perth was sunk about 20 minutes before we were. And their destroyers were so close to us that we could see the ship very clearly. We could see sailors on the ships. And we had taken torpedoes on the starboard side, and we had a big list. The captain announced, abandon ship. I went over and into the harbor, into the water. There was a raft close by, and it was loaded with severely injured guys. So I just caught a hold to the side. To this day, it's hard to believe that it would be done, but those destroyers, those Japanese destroyers, were firing right into the water, right into the guys. You know, and I know a lot of them were killed. Now, our crew was supposed to be 1,100, but we were short, and I think we had 1,068, a number I've always heard. But there was over 700 of those went down with the ship. And Perth had about the same percentage of survivors. But I hung on to this life raft, and the next day the Japanese came along in small boats and picked up guys. They came by my raft, they looked in it and saw all these injured guys. And, you know, we could see they motioned, keep going, you know, and they didn't bother us. And they did that 2 or 3 times during the day. And I stayed 2 nights in the water. But finally, we got into the beach with that raft, and we just laid there and went sound asleep. Anyway, the next morning, a group of natives were standing around looking. You know, they gave us, I remember they had coconuts and their knives. They gave us coconut water, and we drank that. And finally, they said, Dutch, you know, we see the Dutch army. So we went walking. We hadn't gone far, but this truck coming up the road toward us, it got close. 2 guys were standing in the back, and they holding this flag with the big red dot in it. So they took us right to the Japanese truck. We were not Dutch.
Well, Howard survives the sinking of his ship, only to be betrayed and handed over to the Japanese invaders, who are overrunning the Dutch on the island of Sumatra. Turned out that the Japanese were paying a bounty for American sailors. In the next chapter, Howard will relate his experiences as a prisoner of war. He found himself to be a slave laborer under brutal conditions. He worked to build the China-Burma Railroad. Stay tuned. It's a gripping story.